I'm just coming off a Sunday morning public affairs program talking about Boris Johnson telling Laura Kuenssberg this morning, well trailed last night, that the UK should send non-combat forces to Ukraine in order to flip a switch in Vladimir Putin's head and getting him to do what he needs to do for peace in Ukraine, which is to leave Ukraine. And first of all, non-combat. Who do we have in the forces who are non-combat? We have medics and we have chaplains, the padres. I'm not sure that's what he meant, but I'll come back to that. Non-combat forces is a bit of an oxymoron. If we're there to demonstrate resolve alongside the Ukrainians, we have to be prepared to defend ourselves. We have to be prepared for our young men and women to die alongside Ukrainians. And we have to think good and hard in this country about whether we are ready to have that kind of relationship with the Ukrainians, whether our support for Ukraine, which has not been as full as it could have been over the last few years, whether that needs to be stronger in order to support what Boris Johnson is suggesting. I understand that Boris Johnson feels ashamed, as perhaps, as many do, as perhaps we should, about the fact that in 2014 we did not support Ukraine strongly enough, and in 2022 we did not signal resolve strongly enough to Vladimir Putin to tell him that we would stand alongside Ukraine. We would ensure that Russia could not reabsorb Ukraine into the Russian Empire. And as a result, Putin overestimated his freedom of action. And we've seen in recent days that our own estimates were too ready to accept the Russian armed forces' view of their potential to succeed rapidly in Ukraine before we could act. So there is shame to expiate. There is a desperation to act, and the present Secretary of State for Defense has said that we would put a peacekeeping force into Ukraine, part of a coalition of the willing, as though anybody is going to go in unwilling, as part of a coalition of the willing in order to support Ukraine. I'm not convinced that forward deploying British forces alongside, no doubt, French and German forces in Ukraine would be a good thing, because I think it might provide not just a tripwire to defend Ukraine against a recurrence of Russian invasion, might not just provide confidence, but imagine if we found ourselves, the NATO allies in the Donbass, defending the Donbass republics of Russia after a peace treaty against the Ukrainians. Imagine if we were providing a screen for Russia to build up combat forces ready to attack Ukraine again, as they surely would when Russia felt strong enough again. So it's far from straightforward that we want to have British, French, German, American forces deployed to Ukraine. And we have to ask the question, what would we send? So I have put together a proposed force package, a British force package, and I think that 21 multi-role medical regiment, non-combatants themselves, medics, wearing Geneva armbands with a red cross on it, they could go into theater. And yet, if they went into a part of Ukraine where there is not currently hot fighting, If they were to go into some place near Lviv, for instance, where they could be inserted through Lviv airport if it were open, and could be sustained from neighboring countries, from NATO countries, I think that might fit the bill. So first thing, a multi-role medical regiment in Ukraine to provide medical services to the Ukrainian forces and to the Ukrainian civilian population. But that is providing the sinews of war, and that means that Russia would attack, initially with ineffective drone and missile attacks, but progressively more effective attacks. So, if we were to put 21 multi-role medical regiment, for example, into Ukraine, I would suggest we would have to put 16 Regiment Royal Artillery or a comparable air defense regiment of Royal Artillery to protect them. That means that we would be putting combat support into Ukraine, combatant forces to protect our non-combatant forces, because otherwise the Ukrainian armed forces would need to pull their forces out of wherever else they're fighting the Russians to protect our medical regiment, our non-combatants, and that would defeat the purpose. So we would need to put in a multi-role medical regiment. We would need to put in an air defense regiment. And I would suggest that, again, in order not to suck Ukrainian infantry away from other fighting roles, we would need to put in a battalion of infantry to provide local security. So I've just sketched out a force package, which would need a brigade headquarters, possibly located out of theater, possibly located in Poland or Romania. And we would need a logistics element as well to provide logistical support to, I've just described, a medical regiment, an air defense regiment, and an infantry battalion. So a fairly chunky logistics effort as well, all of which could be attacked by the Russians. That'd flip a switch in Vladimir Putin's head, all right. I'll also note that when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister, HMS Defender, which is now equipped with Sea Scepter missiles as well as Aster, back in 21, it exercised the freedom of the seas and the right of innocent passage to sail right past Crimea through Ukrainian territorial waters claimed by the Russians. So, if I am putting a force package together in order to flip a switch in Vladimir Putin's head, to demonstrate that when we in the UK say we stand with Ukraine, we literally stand with Ukraine in the theater of operations, under fire from the Russians, in order to put that force package together, we should have HMS Defender at risk in the region, able to use its air defense assets in order to support the Ukrainians. So, I guess what I'm saying to Boris Johnson is, I feel your pain, I understand your point, I understand talking about deploying British young men and women to literally stand alongside Ukraine, to defend the United Kingdom forward, not just in the Baltic states, but also in Ukraine, to defend Europe from Russia in a forward area. We have to think about what that means. We have to think about what non-combat means in war, and we need to define our terms and ask ourselves whether we in the United Kingdom, whether we in the West are ready to make that level of commitment to Ukraine.